Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing. And at the risk of repeating some of what Congressmember Beatty was talking about, I did want to ask a little bit about non-competes. According to analysis from the Economic Innovation Group, greater enforceability of these contracts reduces new firm entry by 18%. And states that enforce non-competes tend to have lower prevailing wages than states that do not enforce. Overall, one in 5 workers without a college degree is subject to a non-compete agreement, and 30 to 40% are not asked to sign these agreements until they've accepted the position. Dr. Bond, I know you've looked at this, and I want to just clarify, is there any reason a worker that does not have access to proprietary information should be subject to a non-compete agreement? What would those circumstances be?
I think there are very few circumstances in which a non-compete agreement, or especially being compelled to sign a non-compete agreement, has an economic justification, such as trade secrets. I think, as you're noting, by and large, it seems that workers are facing maybe monopolistic conditions, cannot bargain over the conditions of the wage offer that they receive, or so they have to accept them anyway. And it tends to be some of these low-wage workers, with Jimmy John sort of being the archetype example of an employer who had non-competes for their workers for no economic justification. And as I mentioned with Congressman Beatty, that it lowers wages, it reduces wage growth. It really is not good for particularly low-wage workers in these markets.
So you mentioned Jimmy John's. Are there particular industries where we know this has been especially damaging, going from one to the ability for this labor market to be effective?
I'm not aware of the particular industries, but I do know that it is something like 20% of workers who earn below the median wage in the US are subject to a non-compete agreement, which is a really high level if we consider that low-wage workers are less likely to be in those occupations that we could say justifiably have some sort of economic justification for signing a non-compete agreement.
I heard some mention earlier of the president's executive order, which I certainly welcome. And I hope it goes a long way to help workers, although I do think that, and maybe you could tell me if you agree, congressional action is important in this space. I introduced the Workforce Mobility Act, which effectively bans non-compete agreements except in limited circumstances like protecting trade secrets. In San Diego, the innovation ecosystem is the backbone of the economy. We need policies to make sure that workers can compete everywhere. Do you believe, Dr. Bond, that congressional action is important in this space?
I absolutely do. And I think encouraging mobility in the labor market is one of the most important things we can do to have a dynamic and healthy economy. So I think policies that are explicitly designed to encourage worker mobility are what we need to have growth in our labor market going forward from the crisis. And we need explicit legislation. The current executive order is a good start, but it is just sort of encouragement for the FTC to address the issue, where I think enforceability through the Department of Labor is really critical. They have the infrastructure to address labor market violations, and they've been successful in doing so.
Maybe I'd ask Ms. Mitchell to, if you have an opinion on the extent to which non-compete agreements are a downward force on starting new small businesses and local economies that have been hurt by the pandemic, maybe?
It's absolutely a problem. I mean, not only can workers covered by these non-compete agreements not go out and start their own enterprises in that same field that they have skills in, but it also means if you're a new startup, your ability to attract skilled workers is also impeded. And so it's a huge effect on startups.
Right, thank you. I actually wanted to ask a question of Mr. Edwards. Your testimony talked about the importance of open markets. And I wanted to give you the chance to respond to this notion or this concern that's been raised about firms that control the market and compete against the people who are allowed in that market. Doesn't that create an anti-competitive situation that inhibits the ability of private capital to invest in new innovation?
Well, I mean, if big corporations have, I agree with the other panelists when there's regulations and the like preventing open entry, but a lot of huge corporations like Amazon got where they are because of the huge high productivity, and they stay ahead of the pack by investing massively in R&D, which has broad-based spillover benefits for the whole economy. I would note,
yeah, I guess
yeah.
Well, I guess the concern I would raise is that when Amazon's become the market and they're competing against the people in the market, I think that creates an issue. And I take your point on private equity investment and on capital gains. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think that that's something that hasn't been addressed and is still a concern for me. And I've exceeded my time, so I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.